We have to keep the focus on protecting Canadians, protecting our communities, protecting our borders, protecting our way of life.
Canada has quietly reminded Washington of a reality many in U.S. politics forgot existed. When tariffs were imposed on Canadian energy exports, the response did not come in the form of threats or dramatic announcements. Instead, it came through a cold assessment of leverage. Quebec controls something the northeastern United States critically depends on: electricity, not oil, not gas. Power flowing through wires that keep homes warm, hospitals running, and cities lit. For decades, New England has relied on Canadian hydropower as a structural part of its energy system. This is not emergency backup electricity. It is foundational supply. Vermont receives roughly a quarter of its electricity from Quebec. Massachusetts and New York have spent more than a decade and billions of dollars building transmission lines designed for one purpose: to pull massive amounts of clean Canadian hydropower south. And yet, in the middle of this dependence, Washington chose to escalate trade tensions with the very supplier holding the switch. Before we go deeper into how this unfolded and why it matters, support this analysis by hitting like and subscribing. These are the stories shaping real power, real money, and real consequences. The scale of the dependency is difficult to overstate. Quebec supplies a meaningful share of New England's electricity every year, with imports rising sharply during winter freezes and summer heat waves. New York alone imported nearly 8 terawatt-hours of electricity from Canada last year. 2 major transmission projects completed in early 2026 were built specifically to expand that flow even further. Together, they are designed to deliver roughly 20 additional terawatt-hours annually into Massachusetts and New York, under long-term, fixed-price contracts stretching 2 decades into the future. Those lines did not appear overnight. They took more than 10 years of planning, political battles, environmental reviews, and legal challenges. Billions were spent because state leaders concluded there was no realistic alternative. Canadian hydropower offered stable pricing, reliable baseload generation, and a way to meet aggressive climate targets without building new fossil fuel plants. These projects were not optional upgrades. They were central pillars of regional energy strategy. Then tariffs entered the picture. When the U.S. imposed a 10% tariff on Canadian energy imports, the impact was immediate and revealing. Electricity exports into New England's spot market dropped sharply. Major transmission corridors went quiet for days. Official explanations pointed to market conditions and seasonal demand, but the timing told a different story. The message was subtle, but unmistakable. Canada had flexibility, and it was willing to use it. Quebec did not need to tear up contracts to apply pressure. Long-term electricity agreements define minimum delivery obligations, not maximum exports. That distinction matters. By limiting surplus power sales during peak demand periods, Quebec can influence prices and grid stability without technically violating any agreements. During the exact moments when New England relies most on imported power to prevent price spikes or blackouts, that flexibility becomes leverage. The imbalance is structural. Quebec generates electricity from vast reservoirs that can store water for future use. It can redirect power to other provinces, sell later at higher prices, or simply hold supply back. New England cannot do the same. Replacing lost hydropower would require either massive new natural gas generation, which contradicts climate commitments, or grid-scale battery storage that remains prohibitively expensive at the scale required. There is no fast fix, no emergency substitute. Financially, the stakes are staggering. Over the next 3 decades, electricity trade between Quebec and the northeastern United States is projected to exceed $290 billion. That figure reflects not only power sales, but avoided fuel costs, stabilized electricity prices, emissions reductions, and the economic competitiveness of states advertising clean energy to businesses. Entire climate roadmaps in Massachusetts and New York assume uninterrupted Canadian cooperation. If that cooperation weakens, consequences cascade quickly. Wholesale electricity prices rise. Consumers see higher bills. Fossil fuel plants run more often. Planned retirements of aging infrastructure are delayed. Climate targets slide out of reach. The political fallout lands not in Ottawa or Washington, but in state houses and households across New England. What makes this situation especially dangerous is how long it takes to undo. Energy infrastructure moves at the speed of years, not headlines. The transmission lines now in service represent more than sunk costs. They represent locked-in dependency. States cannot simply pivot to a different supplier or build new generation on short notice. The wires exist. The contracts are signed. The system assumes Canadian power will flow. And now, that assumption is gone. Even though tariffs were later paused and exports resumed, the damage extended far beyond any single policy window. Trust fractured. Quebec openly began reassessing how much reliance on U.S. partners made sense going forward. Future projects may become smaller, more flexible, or redirected inward. Long-term integration now carries political risk that did not exist before. For New England, the reality is sobering. Billions of dollars have already been committed to transmission lines, grid upgrades, and long-term contracts that function only if Canada continues to send electricity south. These are not flexible assets that can be repurposed overnight. Energy strategies are built years in advance, shaped by regulatory approvals, financing structures, and political compromises that cannot simply be undone. Electricity does not move like oil or gas, which can be rerouted by ships or pipelines. It travels through fixed physical connections that lock neighboring grids together. When trust within those connections weakens, the shock does not stay contained within the energy sector. It spills into housing costs, business competitiveness, public services, and household budgets. In attempting to use tariffs as a blunt instrument, Washington exposed a vulnerability it did not fully recognize. Electricity is not just another tradable commodity that can absorb price swings or temporary disruption. It is an essential service that underpins modern life, and in this case, it is controlled by a neighbor with strategic alternatives. Canada does not need to shut off power tomorrow to assert leverage. Simply demonstrating that it has options, whether through limiting surplus exports, redirecting supply, or adjusting pricing assumptions, is enough to alter the balance. The power of that leverage lies in its credibility, not in dramatic action. What makes the situation more consequential is that the leverage is one-sided. Quebec can afford patience. Water can remain stored behind dams. Power can be sold later or elsewhere, when conditions are more favorable. New England has no equivalent flexibility. Replacing lost hydropower would require years of construction, massive capital investment, and political battles over fossil fuels or land use. In the meantime, states would face higher prices, increased emissions, and growing pressure from voters and businesses alike. The real question now is not whether Canada will flip a switch. It is whether U.S. states can ever again plan their energy future on the assumption that Canadian cooperation is automatic and permanent. That assumption has been shattered. Even if relations stabilize, uncertainty is now baked into every long-term decision. Future contracts will be scrutinized more closely.
This province to U.S. states that sparked an indignant reaction from President Trump.
Risk premiums will rise. Energy planning will become more cautious and more expensive. If you found this breakdown valuable, Support the channel by liking and subscribing. More critical updates are coming, and you won't want to miss what happens next.